Welcome to Kairos Couples Ministry Moments, where we believe that marriage only works in first place when you do it God's way. So today we want to talk about boundaries in marriage.
Boundaries. Why are boundaries so important in marriage?
It's the same way that we have a boundary right now. She's not crossing over here and I'm not crossing over there. But we really want to explain about what boundaries is really supposed to look like. It will definitely be beneficial to your relationship once you get some understanding, because the Bible says in all you're getting, get understanding. So we start off with you. What is boundaries?
I think sometimes we have such a hard time just setting boundaries, period. Mm-hmm. But I think we find it a little bit easier to set boundaries on other people.
Of course.
And we find a harder time setting boundaries on ourselves.
So boundaries is not about setting it on other people.
It's first, if you had to set a priority,
okay,
we prioritize setting boundaries on ourselves. Because when we set boundaries on ourselves and we follow ourselves, we're leading ourselves first before we're trying to lead our spouse. Mm-hmm. So if I don't set a boundary on you for how I talk to you, then it would be hard for me to talk to you any kind of way and then expect you to talk to me the way that I want to be talked to, because I haven't first set that boundary on myself.
So pretty much to get some understanding, boundaries is like a property line.
Yeah.
So I own my house, I own what's going on my property, but there's a property line that separates what I own and what my neighbor owns.
Yeah.
And so all the responsibility that happens on my land is on me.
Yes.
Not on my neighbor.
So you're in charge of the landscaping, you're in charge of cutting the hedges, you're in charge of cutting the lawn, edging it up, making sure it looks beautiful. Everything that's within our property line, we are responsible for.
But what happens when they're not doing their part? I don't feel that I should have to cut my grass if they're not cutting their grass. Does that have anything to do with them?
Well, it's ownership. It's a different mindset for ownership and just renting. Like if you have a renter, they tend to not really care about the property because it doesn't belong to them. So I'm taking ownership of my property. So my body, my decisions, my choices, my thoughts, my attitude, my motivations, all of that is my property. And I'm in charge of those things that are on my land, and I take ownership of that.
But when we got married, I thought I was supposed to take ownership of your feelings, your emotions, your desires. I thought everything that happened was because of me and I needed to fix it. Is that my responsibility?
No. So the Bible talks about the two becoming one, but we don't disappear into each other and we don't cease to exist as individuals. We just, blend together in our vision and our goals and our God sees us as one. But we still have ownership of our own thoughts, our own ideas, our own motivations, so all of those things we own. And once we take ownership of it, if I'm trying to own your feelings, if you're unhappy, it's not my responsibility to make you happy.
But it's so much easier to say that you making me unhappy. So make me happy.
Right. Because then you don't have to own the fact that your happiness is what you should be owning and not something that is my responsibility. And I think sometimes when we get married, we come into a relationship and we think that this person's job is to make me happy. And so we don't really try to take ownership of our own happiness. Where if we're taking ownership when we're single before we get married, if we take ownership of our own happiness, that person can just add value to it instead of me putting all of that responsibility on you.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. This kind of remind me of a story It was this neighbor who wanted to just say hi to his other neighbor, but this wasn't the neighbor that lived next door. It was the neighbor that lived behind him. And so every morning when he came outside, he saw his neighbor and he would wave to him and say, "Hey, how you doing, neighbor?" But every morning he would take a step into the man's property to say good morning. And every day he'll get closer and closer. And so one day the neighbors realized that this man is saying good morning to him, and he's halfway into his yard. And the neighbor never said anything. He just thought it was kind of odd. And so anyway, the neighbor leaves and goes on vacation. But the gentleman who was saying good morning to him every day had a party. And so with this party that he had, it was a big party and they was having a great time. And the neighbor came home and realized that there was a lot of people in his yard. And so he's trying to understand, whose people is this that's in my yard? And he realized it was his neighbor behind him. And so he goes over to the neighbor and knock at the door, and he says, is this your party that you're having? Because most of your people are in my yard. He says, so you got a problem, you need to take care of it and make sure that they're out of my yard. But the neighbor says, I don't have a problem. So the man didn't understand. He said, what you mean you don't have a problem? You do have a problem because all these people are in my yard. You have the problem. You need to get them out of my yard. And the gentleman said, no, I'm sorry. You misunderstanding. I don't have a problem. You do. And the gentleman said, I don't understand. How do I have the problem when these are not my people? And the gentleman says, when I was in your yard every day saying good morning to you, you never said anything about me not coming over into your property. I thought it was no problem. So who has the problem? And so boundaries is meant to observe and know what's going on your property and deal with it to make sure it doesn't grow and blow up to be bigger than what it needs to be.
Yeah. And sometimes I think I like the way you defined boundaries as boundaries is that line or the border that shows you
the property line,
where I stop and where you begin, what belongs to me and what belongs to you. And so it sounds like that neighbor lost sight of what belonged to him and what belonged to his neighbor. And as he began to encroach more and more on the neighbor never really said anything to reestablish
his property
line and his boundaries. And even during the holiday season where we're like celebrating Christmas and New Year's is coming up and we're all excited and we have our extended family. And a lot of times we'll find that our families tend to encroach on our own boundaries as to, you have to come to our house. So you have to, this is our family tradition when they're establishing their own family traditions. Right. And so we have to kind of let, as we are figuring out now that I'm newly married, this is where my mom and dad stop. This is where our new marriage begins. And really to be able to respect those boundary lines. So
in marriage, I truly believe God has created each and every one of us to be whole. And so to understand that we both need to have our own boundaries, but understand that our boundaries can come together as one, two becoming one. But we both have to understand what is the boundaries in ourselves.
But are boundaries made to be mean?
No, never meant to be mean. Boundaries was not meant to keep people out. It was actually meant to keep people in. Once people realize what it is that you desire, everything that you want in a relationship, it helps everybody to understand how to stay
safe
in the relationship, how to be safe in the relationship. So that's the blessing of having a boundary for yourself and a boundary in your marriage.
Because it makes people understand where they start and where the other person ends. And it makes it safe to be able to have those conversations. Whereas if you're not saying anything, just like the story about the neighbors, and you're constantly encroaching on to your neighbor's property, then there tends to be animosity because the communication and the conversation wasn't had to really establish what where the boundaries stop and start.
So that's the next level. That's the next part is communication. Once you understand what it is that you want, what you want your property to look like, now you got to communicate it to your partner. And so again, in all you're getting, get understanding. So in saying all that, we hope that you have got something out of this moment, this Kairos moment, to help you in your next level, in your next phase, in your relationship with your partner, with God, and in your marriage.
And next time we may discuss and touch on a little bit why it's so hard to set boundaries on ourselves and on others.
So until next time, see you later.